Welcome to Spirits of Whiskey. We explore the wide world of whiskey through the many colorful personalities who make it, promote it, write about it, and more.
With each podcast, Kerry Moynahan, a certified bourbon steward and bartender, and yours truly, Philip Dobard, director of the Cocktail Collection, interview whiskey's most important names.
From high-profile makers, blenders, and ambassadors,
to out-of-the-way innovators and remote pioneers.
Join us as we discover the people and elements that give the water of life its spirit. It is August 12, 2020, and you're listening to episode 13. Today we speak with David Blackmore, Global Master Brand Ambassador for the Glenmorangie Company and Ardbeg Distillery.
But first, stay tuned for this week's Whiskey Chronicles.
Have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
During World War II, despite a raging battle in the Atlantic, exports were still making their way across the ocean from Europe to America, as well as to other destinations across the globe. On February 3, 1941, the SS Politician, an 80,000-ton cargo ship, departed the port of Liverpool carrying goods to New Orleans and Jamaica, only to run aground on February 5th in a storm off the Scottish Isle of Eriskay in the Outer Hebrides. The islanders set out in a sailing boat to help rescue the crew since the lifeboat sent from Barra was given the incorrect location. In assisting the shipwreck crew, the locals learned that the main cargo was some 260,000 bottles of whiskey. And since their island supply of whiskey had run dry due to the wartime rationing, the discovery excited them greatly.
Soon thereafter, a series of illicit salvage operations were launched to rescue the whiskey before the weather completely broke up the ship. Even though the locals believed they were saving the whiskey, they avoided authorities because no duties had yet been paid on the shipment. Villages were raided and bottles were scattered and hidden across the island as authorities hunted down the locals responsible for pillaging the politician. It's estimated the Eriskayans had salvaged some 24,000 bottles.
On April 26, 1941, a group of men pled guilty to the theft, but were charged modest fines between £3 and £5 sterling. The light judgment infuriated Customs Officer Charles McColl, who'd made the official complaint of the theft to the police. McColl continued his crusade against the Scotch salvages. Due to his efforts, eventually some offenders were sent to Inverness and Peterhead to serve a 6-week sentence. Since that time, yet more bottles of whiskey have been recovered by divers and sold at auction.
The now infamous shipwreck and its story were the basis of the 1947 book Whiskey Galore by Compton Mackenzie, adapted for the screen in 1949 by London's Ealing Studios. The 2016 remake starred Eddie Izzard. Diver Donald McPhee explored the wreck in 1987, recovering 8 bottles and later selling them at auction for a total of £4,000. In 2013, a pair of whiskey bottles from the ship sold at auction for £12,050.
Today, a bottle discovered by sea repairman George Curry in the 1980s is currently up for auction. Curry and his team recovered Vat 69, Valentine's, and 4 bottles of Gibby, a now-defunct brand, from the wreck. Currently, at the time of this recording, the highest bid for the collection, which includes Mr. Curry's diving helmet, bricks from the ship, as well as a promotional poster from the 2016 remake of the film, was at $7,869. In honor of this historic Scotch whiskey event, we invited David Blackmore on the show today. David represents several Scotch brands that were around during the time of the SS Politician's shipwreck. Stay with us.
Team Whiskey is the original brand for outdoor sports and whiskey enthusiasts who hosts events and sells apparel to help raise money for cancer support groups. Team Whiskey hats are unique and one of a kind, custom built, and features outdoor and whiskey-related artwork on the underbill. T-shirts are made from a quality and comfortable 60-40 cotton blend that are pre-shrunk. A portion of every purchase and event ticket sold is donated to cancer support groups. To learn more about Team Whiskey, their products, programs, upcoming fundraising events, and how you can help support a cancer support group, visit www.team-whiskey.com. That's www.team-whiskey.com.
Today on Spirits of Whiskey, Our special guest is Mr. David Blackmore. David is Global Ambassador for Glenmorangie and Ardbeg single malt Scotch whiskies. Welcome, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Philip.
Good to have you with us.
Yes, I'm very excited. We've only had one Scotch so far, which breaks my heart because I'm a huge Scotch lover. And
Hooray!
you just keep doing all these beautiful American whiskeys.
Well, to be fair, that Scotch was represented by Simon Brooking, whom you know well.
Simon is an awesome fellow. Love him to pieces.
I think Simon represents at least 6 single malts, perhaps.
I can never keep track anymore. That guy, he's known. Whenever you think Simon, you think Lefroy. That's for sure. Though,
Indeed,
right?
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
We bring up him as well because you were mentioned in his whiskey journey. So we always like to start out with, what was your whiskey journey and how did you get from, being a kid, growing up in Scotland, I'm assuming, to now you represent, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. How did that all come to be?
It's a great question, and I was born and raised in Edinburgh, so you'd assume, that I was almost sort of born with a bottle of whiskey in my hand, and nothing could be further from the truth. Neither of my parents really were whiskey drinkers. I remember getting to the age of going off to university and still not really liking Scotch whiskey. I went to my first whiskey tasting whilst at St Andrews University, and to be honest, it didn't really click much with me, and I thought, this maybe not really be my thing. However, my dad was a really keen wine drinker and, got me into loving wine, particularly European red wine. And I think that maybe was a good sort of background that set me up. But it didn't happen for me. Scotch whiskey love didn't happen until I was about 23 or 24. And I was working for an events management company out in Linlithgow, so halfway between Edinburgh and Glasgow. And my boss at the time, a Canadian gentleman, a lot of the events we put on were whiskey related. People were having conferences, American companies coming in for a conference in Scotland. What's the sort of thing they want to do on their leisure days or their evenings? Well, a Scotch whiskey tasting would be one of them. So I would be organising those sorts of things and then sitting in the back of the room, frankly, with a clipboard, making sure everything was going okay. And I would be listening to the whoever we'd hired as the whiskey expert leading the tasting. So I started to sort of really appreciate the nuances of Scotch whiskey. I still hadn't really got a taste for it. But then one day, it must have been a quiet day, my boss sat me down and tasted me on a couple of whiskies he had in the office, and I started to get it. And it kind of led from there, really. Actually, I think I even hired the illustrious Charlie MacLean on a couple of occasions to give tastings. So, to start your whiskey career off or your whiskey journey off by sitting in a room listening to Charlie MacLean, not a bad start.
Yeah,
really.
pretty good.
And then, a couple of drams that my boss at the time just poured, and it was, I'm trying to remember, that was the one that really clicked, that turned the light bulb on, was Mortlach. Mortlach's 16-year-old from Diageo's old Flora and Fauna range. Heavily sherried, big, meaty, intense whiskey. And it's funny, people say, start off with the light whiskies. That's often the case for people's journeys. But I know people, including my wife, whose first whiskey that they really got was Ardbeg. My wife, how do you start at Ardbeg?
I don't know.
but people do. I started with Sherry Bomb.
Right.
Absolutely. So it all started there. And very quickly after that, I realized that I hadn't really known what I wanted to do with my life and what career I was going into. I'd bounced around various things. And having joined the Scotch Malt Whisky Society as an avid kind of member wanting to learn, I then decided that was a great place to maybe work. So I managed to get in, and at the very, very bottom rung, I worked part-time shifts as a bartender at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And even for the first few months, I was cleaning dishes to add some more shifts in the kitchen at the society. So you don't start in the Scotch industry much much lower than the pot washer. That was me.
You could start
There
as
you
the
go.
pot still washer.
The pot still washer. There you go. Very good. I love dad jokes.
Remind me of my sister. She's made a career change, and now she's into coffee as much as I'm into whiskey. And so
Oh,
she
awesome.
wanted to go get a job working at this cafe because they roasted their own beans. And then she ended up being the glorified dishwasher. And after 3 weeks, she said, yeah, this is not why I came to work here. So she's like, I'm out. And now she's building her own company and roasting her own stuff. So good for her.
Oh, great. Well, you two need to combine your passions by getting hold of a bottle of Glenmorangie Signet, our
Yes.
chocolate malted
Yes.
Glenmorangie.
A coffee bomb.
I was talking to Philip about that bottle. I said, I wonder if we should get this bottle because a local bar here has it on sale because they're liquidating. And I thought, that might be fun to taste, but it was still a little bit too expensive for me.
Well, darn. Now I know a guy who might be able to sort that out for you guys. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do. But last summer, actually, I was back in Scotland. One of the things I was back for was what we call Signet Week. And it's the kind of 2 weeks a year when we use the chocolate malted barley through the whole distillery. And the place smells like a coffee shop. It's just amazing.
Wow.
So we took some writers to Scotland, some whiskey geeks to Scotland to show them the process. And then at Glenmorangie House, we have this country house hotel just by the distillery. We actually had a young lady who is a coffee expert from a coffee roaster in London come up and take us through the whole kind of nuances of roasting coffee, which was all new to me. So I get it. It's amazing. Really,
it is
really
amazing.
cool.
She was.
Yeah.
I visited her recently, and she was telling me about all these different things, and she's getting certified and her new roaster, and she's like, and then there's cuppings, and there's this, and there's that, and I was like, oh my god, it's like it might even be a little bit more complicated than whiskey tasting.
Seriously, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, and I was amazed by this home roasting bean roaster that this lady had, and it was all high tech, and she could control it from her phone. Which was pretty amazing. Yeah, so that was kind of my journey.
David, before we get too far into your career, I'd like to go back to your work at St. Andrews and what you studied. Are you not formerly a professional actor?
I am absolutely not a professional actor in the past. And I hope that, my background, what I maybe miss in terms of professionally honed presentation skills, I gain in other ways. So my degree at St. Andrews was a science degree, which helps a lot in whiskey. It was in marine environmental biology. But I started off, with modules in chemistry and geology. My father's a chemist.
We can expect the algae edition of Glenmorangie any year now.
Do you go to the beach and drink with the dolphins?
Well, it's interesting because I haven't been involved in this program much because I'm, based in the States. But we've had a program with the Marine Conservation Trust in the UK to clean up the Dornoch Firth, the estuary, the river by Glenmorangie Distillery. And we've been working on this program to reintroduce native oysters to the Dornoch Firth. So it's actually perfect. I suddenly see my company doing something really beneficial in the field that I was actually at university for.
That's really cool.
It's kind of cool.
That's something.
Yeah,
full circle.
Yeah. So between the society and Glenmorangie, I guess it was because I'd been with the society for a while, and then they were purchased. Certainly, the main branch in the UK was purchased by Glenmorangie Company. They no longer own it now, I must add. They sold it again, but. During that period of time, almost immediately after the purchase, I was in London and I met the illustrious Dr. Bill Lumsden, our head of Whiskey Crew, at Whiskey Live London. And I had already kind of decided that I wanted to get out of London, at least for a while, and get to the States. So I got his business card and I bugged him. I really bugged him. I called him one week and I emailed him the next for a solid year saying, I want a job as an ambassador.
What year was this that you were bothering this poor gentleman?
About 2004.
Okay.
Through most of 2004. And then 2005, he finally said, right, listen, come back up to Edinburgh and interview. He pretty much said, it's your job not to screw the interview up. And then he sent me to the States.
Nice.
Here I am all these years later. The travel and the late nights and everything are not so much fun. I know that sounds ridiculous, but try it at some point.
Oh yeah,
that's the least fun. part of
It's
it.
not. It can be night after night after night,
Yeah,
18-hour days.
yeah.
That takes its toll. Now that said, you've been named Scotch Whiskey Ambassador of the Year 3 times.
That's
Uh-huh.
pretty amazing.
That there's some stiff competition there.
There is. I just wrote bigger checks. No, I'm joking.
Well, tell us about that honor. I mean, clearly your CV suggests that you're committed not just to the brands you represent, but to whiskey.
I love it. Yeah,
Tell us what that honor means to you.
it means everything. I decided from a young age I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I did know whatever I got into, I wanted it to be more than just a 9 to 5 job. I wanted it to be my life, which is very opposite to a lot of people's ideas. They want to segment home life from work life and have a balance. I thought that the balance should be finding almost a vocation. And that's how I've always thought of this
Nice.
career. So, yeah, and starting at the Whiskey Society, being kind of responsible for presenting at the time about 120 different distilleries' products potentially, but with no branding behind it at all, I think was a great entry into Scotch whiskey and appreciating that every distillery out there produces great whiskey. There may be some distilleries that you prefer over others. There may be some that have more home runs than others, but you can find a great whiskey from everywhere. Everybody should be proud of their products, and every brand ambassador for certain. If you're not proud of the brand you're working for, then you should go find another one to work for.
Right.
But no, it's been fantastic to be able to have that camaraderie with fellow whiskey ambassadors who share a passion for my products, and for me to share a passion for their products. And going to, for example, going to Islay for Ardbeg business. It's tough to say that, isn't it? But I'm not unless the time crunch is absolutely critical. I will be doing my damnedest to get round, Lagavulin and Lafroig at least. Even though I've been around the distilleries a bazillion times, if I'm right next door, I still want to go see them, say hi, see what they've got in the gift shop, take a peek at the stills, if nothing else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. David, you have been on our short list of guests for a few months now, and there was a recent development in the news that bumped you up the list. And speaking of matters marine, the Whiskey Galore ship and its liquid cargo.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the film Whiskey Galore, and then the remake more recently as well of it, it's worth watching if you're into whiskey at all. And so the SS Politician was heading off with a cargo hold loaded full of Scotch whiskey and other things, including a bunch of money, I believe, and ran into a massive storm and ran aground off the west coast and on the Western Isles of Scotland. And there's all sorts of stories of bottles being sort of hidden all over the island. And then the one that gets me is I heard a story that all the bottles that the authorities could get their hands on, so the rumor has it that they got a local road tarmac crew in, and they laid the bottles down, and they put tarmac over the top of them and steamroll it into the road. So if you're driving around the island, you're probably driving over many, many, many bottles of Scotch whiskey.
That is so sad.
Crazy.
Sad. Kerry and I were talking last week about this, and we wanted someone who represents brand or brands that were around at the time, and certainly the two you represent very much were. Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, 1843 and 1815, respectively.
Indeed, yeah, we were certainly around. I don't know if we were on the boat. Probably not, if I'm honest. But we could say we were on the boat. It's just a crazy part of Scotch whiskey history. There's so many amazing stories. Mm-hmm. But yeah. And I'm desperate to get back to Scotland. I was supposed to be at the Islay Festival along with Simon and everyone this year. And of course, we know what happened there. So.
Yeah, indeed. Well, so can you talk to us a bit? Give us the overview, the quick and dirty history of these two storied brands.
Sure. Well, maybe actually I'll start with Glenmorangie, even though it's the younger of the two distilleries. Foundation date, as we've got on the label, says 1843. However, there's a lot of evidence and records to show that alcohol production of some sort was happening at the Glenmorangie site way back as early as the 1730s. Yeah. And back then it was a legitimate farm brewery, and most likely with some illicit distilling going on the side.
Right.
An agricultural product.
Indeed, absolutely. And I think the reason that Glenmorangie Brewery became pretty renowned and its beer was being exported as far south as Edinburgh, which back in those days was something,
Sure.
is part of the same reason that we are who we are today. We've got this unusually mineral-rich source of spring water at Glenmorangie, the Tarlogie Spring, and that's what the breweries would have been using as well. And if you're into your beers, you'll know that Burton upon Trent in England is kind of mecca for beer nerds, and brewers around the world try to Burtonize their water to replicate that style. So Tarlogie Spring water is chemically very similar to that Burton upon Trent water. Makes great beer, creates a more fruity style of beer, a more vigorous fermentation. So that's probably why Glenmorangie is where it is. We got going legally in 1843 with a license to distill. Woohoo, amazing. Finally. Only took us 100 and something years. And William Matheson, who worked at the nearby Balblair distillery for over 20 years, took out the license. So he was our founding father, sadly passed away a few years after that. And Mrs. Matheson actually ran the distillery for many, many years, the brains of the operation. And she brought in the Maitland brothers in 1887, and they refurbished the distillery. And those were the guys that brought in, from their knowledge of running gin distilleries in London, they brought in these incredible tall stills, to this day, the tallest stills in Scotland, which create huge amounts of reflux during distillation, lots of copper contact, which cleans the spirit up and makes a very elegant, fragrant, floral spirit at Glenmorangie, and really sets the tone.
That is a hallmark characteristic of the whiskey, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's those guys, the Maitland brothers in 1887, not only did they put the tall stills in with real foresight, but they actually installed one of the first ever systems of steam coiled heating for the stills rather than direct fired, which also leaves a lot more copper contact. So they were pretty certain, we can't interview them, but I'm pretty certain that they knew exactly what they were doing. They were aiming for a particular style that didn't really exist in Scotland till that point.
Speaking of men whom we cannot interview, aside from serving as the title of an album by Alan Holdsworth, who's absolutely one of my favorite guitarists, one of the greatest of all time, who are the 16 men of Tain?
So, yeah, we've historically, up until recently, always had a workforce of 16 craftsmen running the distillery as much as possible by hand. However, 2009, we added 50% capacity to the distillery with 4 new stills. Mm-hmm. And at that point, the kind of obvious thing would be to say, 16 men at Tain, we've got to retain the hands-on approach, and the old way of doing things was 16 people. But actually, you couldn't. There wasn't a big enough workforce.
So is it the 24 men of Tain?
So we're actually unofficially about 28 or 29 men of Tain these days, because the only way to have kept 16 would have been to automate half the distillery way beyond where we wanted to. So we didn't do that. We instead hired more people and trained them up and created more craftsmen and women. So that's probably a good thing, really. So yeah, it's about 28, 29 men and women of Tain at Glenmorangie now. And the Ardbeg story comes in terms of the Glenmorangie company only in 1997, when Ardbeg, is an older distillery, 1815. It bounced around so many owners in its history, and when it came to the 1970s, it was going great. It was just like its cousin next door, Lafroig. Mm-hmm. It was producing smoky whiskey, the large lion's share going into blends, which was what everyone was drinking in the 70s. 80s come around, and for whatever reason, people stopped drinking whiskey, both sides of the Atlantic, and they sure as hell stopped drinking blended Scotch. And, from 81 through the 80s is just a terribly sad time for the Scotch whiskey industry, with distilleries closing left and right. And Ardbeg closed in 81 and didn't distill a drop again until 89. Oh, wow. And distilled quite a bit in 1990, but largely for contracts for blenders. Kind of limped along from 91 to 96. And then the owners at the time put it up for sale. They owned Lefroy next door. They didn't need two distilleries that were producing, for certainly the purposes of blending, relatively similar spirits. I wouldn't say they were similar in terms of, enjoying them as single malts, but certainly for a blender, they were doing roughly the same thing. So they decided to put Ardbeg up for sale as a last-ditch attempt before possibly demolition. Luckily, the Glenmorangie company came in. We had a long history of running distilleries. We had a lot of blended brands at the time as well, and we bid for Ardbeg, and we were successful. So
Yeah.
that was 97, and the place was in dire need of repair. And we've spent many, many times more than it cost us to purchase the distillery,
Wow.
fixing the distillery.
Wow. I will say this, how the logo, the Ardbeg logo, is among my favorite in the industry. How far back does this logo, there's this graphic art go, do you know?
So, to be honest, most of what you see, the bottle shape that you see now, and the way that it's all put together dates from about 97, with a bunch of work done by a gentleman who still works for us, Hamish Torrey, who is largely responsible, along with a couple of agencies that he employed, with getting the current look and feel of Ardbeg, which looks like it just kind of appeared with the creation of Earth to me. It looks like there was never a time when there wasn't the Ardbeg logo and the Ardbeg bottle.
Okay.
But the A itself is taken from the Book of Kells, so it is much, much, much older, and the Celtic knotwork that you see on the edge of the label and round the cork and such like is taken from the Kildalton cross, which sits in Kildalton Kirk in the graveyard there. So there's lots of, the whole thing about Ardbeg is being absolutely rooted in Islay, but with a kind of an irreverent side to it. We always say we take the process of making our whiskies deadly seriously. We don't take ourselves very seriously at all. Which is quite often almost the opposite of some other whiskey brands,
Indeed. A note to our listeners, you'll be able to see this artwork on our website once this episode is posted.
Yes.
Awesome.
So what about the lines? How extensive are the Glenmorangie and Ardbeg brands lines?
Yeah, we've got a pretty exciting and ever-changing lineup for both distilleries of a core kind of setup of products that are tried and tested and people love. And we kind of evolve those. We change them from time to time, but we have a lot of limited releases, particularly from Ardbeg. Keep the excitement up, and some people might criticize us for that, but frankly, what's the point if it's not always new things? And you might not like them all. That's fine. Hopefully you like most of them. We're always trying to produce new and interesting flavors, that's for sure.
You do a good job of it. Both brands do, I think.
Thank you. What I love about Ardbeg and Glenmorangie is that they are pretty much the kind of bookends of the flavor spectrum of the entire Scotch landscape. Everything else kind of resides somewhere in between. You can get two more different single malts.
Well, speaking of the product lines, the bit of a tease to our listeners, David suggested that we do a follow-up episode with the makers of these two, and we can talk more extensively and taste more extensively other releases. So we'll look forward to that.
Absolutely. That'd be a lot of fun.
Speaking of tasting.
So we've got two expressions to taste. And from two very different single malts. So I thought also it'd be interesting to go for two kind of ends of the age spectrum as well. So we've gone for a Glenmorangie 18-year-old, which actually I think does an amazing job of not becoming decrepit. It's old, but not decrepit. We've all tasted whiskey, regardless of the age statement on the label. There are whiskies that they're over the hill. They've had too much time in oak or whatever, and it would have been so nice to taste them younger. Here, Glenmorangie 18, I think what really, and I have to say, hands down, this is my favorite Glenmorangie as a day-to-day thing. And whiskey is all about mood and place. So I may change my mind tomorrow for a while, but as a consistent thing, I would say Glenmorangie 18 is usually my favorite.
For whiskey that is set in wood for 18 years, this has a very gentle nose.
Yes.
Absolutely. Incredibly gentle nose. lots of tropical fruit. How on earth are we getting this elegant tropical fruit note, this vivacious complexity of fruity notes after 18 years in oak? It's some sort of magic.
It really is.
It's pretty impressive.
It really is.
It is magic.
So all of the whiskey spends 15 years in American oak.
Ex-bourbon, typically?
Ex-bourbon, yeah, ex-bourbon American oak for 15 years, at which point at 15 years we'll take 30 out of every 100 barrels of that 15-year-old and re-rack into Oloroso sherry casks for a 3-year finish, leaving the 70 exactly where they are. So basically, when we get to 18, we have an inventory in the warehouse where 30% of the barrels have had a 3-year sherry finish and 70% did all American oak all the way through. And then it's combining the two together to allow just enough sherry influence to kind of round off any potential tannic excesses from the American oak. But really it's about letting the American oak shine as much as we can.
It really does a good job. It does a really good job of balancing the two, because it's not, despite its 3 years in sherry cask, it is not a sherry bomb.
Absolutely not. It's great to hear, because we don't want it to be about sherry.
It also doesn't give me that big corn flavor from the bourbon either. It's really, I love it.
Totally. It's really got that balance there, and just wow. I've always said this is my choice if I got stranded on a desert island and I had a whiskey genie pop up and say, you have one bottle you could take to the desert island, it'll be this.
It's a good bottle to take.
It's kind of summery too, so it'd be good on the beach.
I'd be okay.
Yeah.
I'd survive.
I have thought about choosing Glenmorangie Original, because in the UK we actually have a 4.5 litre bottle of Glenmorangie Original, so I could just last me a lot longer on my desert island. But
yes,
I think I'd stick with the 18.
Yeah, that's more than a handle, to be sure.
It is. A 4.5 litre bottle is a full 6-pack case in one bottle.
All right.
It's impressive.
Wow. I'll take one of those, please.
Not legal for sale in the United States of America, sadly.
Yeah.
So just give it to me. It'll be fine.
Yes. Well, there is that.
Always apologizing for our arbitrary standards.
Oh, I know.
Well, no. I mean, I live here for a reason. It's a great place. So.
I was wondering what that reason would be, but we won't get into that.
Back to the whiskey.
Back to the whiskey. It begs the next whiskey. It Ardbegs the next whiskey.
So Ardbeg 5-year-old.
Right, well, let's open this bad boy.
Wow.
Ooh, that's smoky.
How dare we release a whiskey so young? And that's kind of the point. It's so smoky.
Again, very welcoming on the nose. It doesn't say... it's not like Octomore where, you can smell it from across the room. Not that that's a bad thing. We love it.
No. I know what you mean, though.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we talked about, I was kind of on the out. I get involved in some of our whiskey creation projects. I wasn't really involved in this one at all, I have to say, but I know, hearing from the guys and stuff, that there was a debate about this one when they were talking about making a young Ardbeg. Maybe we should make a 3-year-old Ardbeg to really shock people. And I think when they looked at it, the end decision was made based on liquid quality, and it was just felt that 5 was where things started to settle out a little bit. 3 was just too raw and too young. So 5 for Ardbeg. And you know what? From my experience, certainly of visiting other distilleries on Islay, enjoying other distilleries' products on Islay, I think Islay is one of the places where those smoky whiskies in general tend to mature really well very quickly.
Right.
So young Islay whiskies are often delicious. Kalila, wow. Young Kalila can just be a thing of absolute beauty.
The mouthfeel on this is extraordinary. It rolls all over the top.
You already put it in your mouth, huh? Okay, I guess I need to do that. Okay, hold on. I was still smelling.
So we've used a few again, but here we are using the influence of some sherry butts here, but we're using a percentage that's been matured in refill sherry butts, just to give that mouthfeel, really, just to get a little bit of depth. And it's, again, not to give the sense, in a similar sort of way, it's not to give the sense of a sherried whiskey, but it's just to give the whiskey a little bit more backbone, a little substance, without, maybe the drinker might not even realize there was sherry involved here, but it just seems to help a little.
I think I kind of taste it on my tongue, but after the finish, all I get is peaty iodine.
Surprise!
It's Ardbeg.
Surprise! It's Ardbeg. Exactly. It would be a shock if you didn't. Right? But yeah, I mean, just to try and prove that Islay whiskies can be awesome young, and that, you know, the other thing is, if people are massive peat freaks, then the very nature of the fact that the phenols will dissipate over time, over maturation time, and the smokiest any spirit from Islay will ever be is the day it comes off the still. You know, you're going to want your spirit younger rather than older, you know.
Oh, now see, I just took my last sip of the Glenmorangie after that, and it gave the Glenmorangie a really interesting flavor. I like it.
I'm going back. I'm following your lead.
Maybe you have a career in blending.
Maybe.
There you go.
Ooh, yeah, I can still feel it in my mouth, even though I've had the other one since.
Yeah, that's you know, there's a reason why we did the Ardbeg second. Right?
Yep.
And poor old Ardbeg, if I do tastings that involve both whiskies, it always ends up at the end.
So, cocktails. Talk to us about cocktails. What's your preferred category?
Yeah.
Stirred, shaken, built?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I wouldn't profess to be a massive cocktail expert, but I'm getting better, let's just say. And I must confess to, in my youth, being a horrible Scotch whisky snob, to the point of when I ran the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bar in London for a couple of years, I point blank refused to have an ice making machine in the building in case anybody would put ice anywhere near their glass of single malt, and let alone make a cocktail with it. I'd have thrown you out of a window for that.
You were a monster snob, indeed.
You're a wee beastie.
I was. Some people will say I still am. I've seen the error of my ways, I have to say. I've seen the light. And for Wee Beastie, you know, we actually thought long and hard about the flavor profile of Wee Beastie in regards to making cocktails. And certainly the price point is, you know, pre-COVID, when we were looking at the on-premise, it was at a price point that we were hoping you would make Ardbeg a lot more of a commercial possibility than it was. And our US national ambassador, Cameron George, who is, you know, Mr. Cocktail, was part of that team that nuanced the flavor profile of Wee Beastie specifically based on a range of cocktails. So we have a whole range of cocktails that Cameron and a couple of his cocktail making colleagues have worked on with Wee Beastie. When it comes to cocktails, for me, to be honest, the one that really I love with Ardbeg is a Bloody Mary. I think an Ardbeg Bloody Mary is amazing.
Okay.
Wow.
Just the best.
I'm not the biggest fan of the Bloody Mary, but I want to have that.
Yeah.
I want to try that.
A last word, absolutely brilliant with Ardbeg. What else? Glenmorangie, yes, my wedding day cocktail. Currently very unpopular cocktail for some reason or other, but when it's made right, it's brilliant still, I think. But a Blood and Sand.
Oh, yes, very much.
Yeah. So a Glenmorangie Quinta Ruban, our port cask finished Glenmorangie in a Blood and Sand made with blood orange juice is just brilliant. I've been getting into making a lot of boulevardiers with Glenmorangie or Ardbeg because it's dead simple and has the required results.
That's been a popular choice. I think we've had a lot of people say boulevardiers.
I've always been a fan of Negronis, and in fact, a funny story, my first ever Negroni was served to me on a flight, a British Airways flight from London Heathrow to Pisa, Italy, and you'll know immediately who this was. It was finger stirred by
Gaz Regan.
Gaz Regan himself. He was sitting next to me on the flight to Pisa for some trip we were on. And he asked the flight attendant to make him Negronis, and she didn't know what one was. So he asked for all the components of a Negroni in mini bottles and a bunch of plastic cups and some ice, and made me and himself a Negroni right there and then.
You were tilting towers with Gaz Regan en route to Pisa.
I was. It was a great memory for sure.
Yeah, we were talking a recent episode. We talked to Lynn House of the Pilbrands, and she and Gaz had a beautiful history.
What a man! What a loss! What a man! There we go.
Very much so.
Yeah.
On that note, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk food.
Streaming, sipping, and sensory. Bourbon Women's Sip Summer Series kicks off Women's Equality Week with a 3-day digital conference, August 20th through 22nd, 6 to 9:30 p.m. Enjoy a top-shelf collection of spirits education right at your fingertips. This first ever and distinctively curated online series will keep you sipping with fellow bourbon women this summer. You'll experience unique tastings, mixology, food pairings, and informative and engaging segments with industry experts that include live Q&A, all from the comfort of your own home. Plus, you can take part in our first ever e-auction of one-of-a-kind bourbon items and experiences. Tickets and more information available at bourbonwomen.org.
And we're back. Thanks for sticking around to hear more from David Blackmore. Chef Louise is off today, so we have a special treat. David is going to talk to us about some of the recipes that he's heard about using his whiskeys.
So yeah, I mean, food and Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, you might think, pairing and combining single malt Scotch whiskies and food, certainly still to some people surprising. So that surprises me because I've been doing it for so long.
This has changed.
And worked with a bunch of chefs, but it's certainly not as easy to do well as pairing with wine, I don't think. Mm-hmm. We have this lovely private country house hotel near the distillery where we have a really great culinary team. They've worked on a whole range of brilliant, food pairing suggestions, and whenever you eat at Glenmorangie House, everything is paired beautifully with our whiskies. And apart from that, I've also worked over the years with a whole host of big name chefs on projects, and I'm hopefully not going to miss any out. But we actually had a brand relationship with Marcus Samuelsson for a couple of years, so that was a treat.
Oh wow, yeah, I have worked with him, and so has Louise on The Taste.
Crazy. A very memorable dinner launching Glenmorangie to Sale, which was our whiskey made with Maris Otter winter barley, and that was with Dan Barber from Blue Hill. That was an amazing, for me to be able to be standing up and talking alongside a guy like that I had to pinch myself a bit. Tom Colicchio, we actually, about 2 nights before Gaz Reagan was finger stirring me a Negroni on the way to Italy, Gaz and I were at Tom Colicchio's place, did a launch with him, amazing menu. I've done a couple of things. I've did a Glenmorangie breakfast launch with Eric Rippert at Le Bernardin, which was something different for sure, and amazing. And Pierre Garnier at Twist in Las Vegas as well. So it's really been really interesting to watch these chefs.
I want to talk about Marcus Samuelsson for just a minute, because we, the Center for Culinary Culture, have done some work with him in the past, and such an interesting case, and such evidence of the globality of whiskey. Marcus is Ethiopian by ethnicity, by birth, raised by Swedish parents in Sweden, and made his name opening and running a world-class American soul food joint in Harlem.
And it's an amazing place.
Amazing story.
Just an amazing place, yeah, and such a nice guy to work with as well.
Very approachable for a star
very
chef.
Approachable. I was starstruck, but the pairing. Every chef takes a different kind of approach to pairing with Scotch whiskey, I think, and I've seen a lot of, certainly from these guys, they know what they're doing. They're always, the pairings are spectacular for sure.
Now, how would you pair these two?
Well, let's think about Glenmorangie 18 to start with. It's elegant, it's complex, it's got a bit of gravitas to it from the sherry notes. Nothing massive though. So I think meat and protein wise, you can be pretty flexible with the 18. Anything from the sort of a gamey side of things, beef, duck, grouse, venison, lamb. I think any of these things work. Pork works as well. So you've got a lot of things to play with there. Where you get into the sort of fruits and vegetables, you can be much more tailored and specific. And I think apricots, blackberries, figs are probably the sort of things I start thinking of. There's a lot of interesting things that can be done. And one of the dishes that the Glenmorangie House likes to do with Glenmorangie 18, which would probably come towards the end of a meal, just by the nature of what we're presenting through the meal. But something like a sticky toffee pudding, Glenmorangie 18-year-old butterscotch sauce, and a really simple homemade vanilla ice cream.
Okay, now I really want that.
Right?
I'm still full from breakfast, and I want that.
And then on Ardbeg, it's interesting because I don't know if we have any particular pairings set up for Wee Beastie, but Ardbeg in general, I think, strangely works really well with just fresh oysters on the half shell, Yeah. And some people like to pour the Ardbeg onto the oyster.
Oh, a luge.
A luge. To be honest, I'm not. I got caught up in all that. I'm not so much of a fan of the luge. I've realised more recently. No. I think I like to have the oyster and then a little sip of Ardbeg. To be honest, I think it works.
Yeah, well,
better.
It's something of a party trick, luge.
Yes, yeah. But oysters work well.
But they also have to make sure that the salt water's out, because if there's still a big bunch of salt water in it. I've had it where they've given it to me and it's already like in a deep thing of salt water, and then they add, and I'm like, I'm not drinking a glass of salt water, a chunk in it. I would like to eat my oyster.
There's also luging with beef bone that's been cut in half lengthwise. After you eat the marrow, you luge whiskey down the bone.
One of the other things that's called a clootie dumpling. And a clootie dumpling is a cloth, and it's basically a kind of a fruit pudding boiled or steamed, wrapped tightly in cotton cloth or something of the like. And we stood on the shores of Loch Ugadal and had Ugadal and a piece of fresh clootie dumpling, and wow, perfect for that whiskey, that sherried smoky whiskey with this kind of steamed fruit pudding up on the hill. Amazing.
Well, David, thank you so much. I am very excited about all the different food pairing ideas that you just gave us. Normally we have Chef Louise Leonard that does this segment for us, but she is on a vacation. And I thank you so much for coming on the show today.
And this has been a delight.
Yes.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for inviting me, guys. I really appreciate it. And thank you to my industry colleagues for recommending me.
Indeed.
All right. Well, we'll definitely catch up with you in a couple of months, and hopefully we can talk to the distillers and makers over at Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. And until then, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please visit our website to see our show notes on today's podcast at spiritsofwhiskey.com. That's whiskey with an E.
We'll include links and supporting documents from today's Whiskey Chronicles, as well as some more information on David Blackmore.
As always, you can see our upcoming topics and guest roster and links to past shows. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, Salam.
Slanchavam.
Spirits of Whiskey is a production of First Reel Entertainment and the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available on Anchor, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts can be heard.